られないでも諦めない牙と拳握りしめてこの運命と明日の記憶いつ砕いて守るよ
Clouds scudded across the night sky, covering the half moon as they passed. Somewhere, a clock struck the hour, 3 loud gongs that reverberated through the chill autumn air. Jiro Mochizuki stared out his window from the second story of the warehouse-turned-apartment that he shared with Mimiko Katsuragi and his little brother Kotaro. He held his long silver katana to one side, the blade about an inch out of its sheath. He could hear Kotaro's soft snoring coming from the room next door, something he was very glad to hear. And, if he let his senses roam a little further, he could hear the soft breath of Mimiko, followed by the occasional groan as she dreamed. But those were not the sounds that had piqued his interest this night. He let his senses roam again, listening, smelling for the faint scent that had woken him in the first place, a scent he did not know, followed by the most peculiar sounds. He heard it again, the slight, quiet banging of something hitting metal. Judging from the direction, it was somewhere on the street level, near the back of the building. There was a door down there, old and disused. He and Mimiko had talked about it once before, but it had been dismissed because she hadn't been able to open it. The hinges were rusted shut, and though Jiro was sure any blackblood, or anyone determined enough, could have forced it open, he'd let it be. Now he wished he hadn't. The sound came again, along with the faint sound of metal slowly being bent. Whoever was down there could not be a normal human. Redbloods, as they called themselves in the special zone, did not have the strength to bend still. The moonlight glinted off of Jiro's exposed teeth, fangs protruding past his lips as he uttered a warning and a challenge.
If I were you, I would rethink what you're doing. I don't think either of us wants a confrontation tonight.
If it truly was a vampire down there, and he was fairly sure it was from the smell, he knew they would be able to hear him. There was a moment of silence, followed by more faint scratching, and the moaning of already abused metal.
This is your last chance to leave while you still can.
After another long pause, there was the sound of quick footsteps in the alley, then silence. Jiro strained to hear, closing his eyes as he sought out any other sounds, but the night was silent. He gripped the hilt of his sword tightly, the leather of his gloves protesting slightly at the strain. He waited a moment or two longer, then let his grip relax, the blade to slide back into its sheath. With a sigh, Jiro let his shoulders sag momentarily before leaning against the window's large frame. A slight breeze came through the window. The scent was clean. In the back room, Mimiko murmured in her sleep. It was time he went back to bed as well. He slid the window closed and headed to his coffin.
Oh, what a dream.
Mimiko headed towards the kitchen, her eyes only half open as she stumbled around the apartment. She felt like she hadn't slept a wink and figured her dreams were to blame, though she couldn't remember what they were about. Something about a vampire she felt sure she did not know, but that was about it. Without realizing where she was going, she found herself knocking into the corner of the table, jabbing herself just below her knee.
Ow!
She looked up in surprise, realizing that she'd overshot her mark and had gotten a bruise in the process.
Morning, Mimiko.
Kotaro popped up in the background of her muddled thoughts.
Are you okay?
The young vampire tugged at her robe, trying to get the distracted girl's attention.
Hey, Mimi.
Jiro was always reminding him of how fragile red bloods were. Mimiko turned towards the stove, subconsciously waving him aside, not really awake yet.
Morning, Kotaro.
She fumbled to fill a kettle with water and set it to boil. It didn't even strike her that the young vampire was usually still asleep when she got up. Figuring that his human friend was probably okay, even though the sound of her running into the table had been rather loud, Kotaro zoomed happily around the kitchen, chattering a million miles a minute about his plans for the day.
And don't forget that Sei and I are going to play today. Sei. Right.
The kettle began to steam. She stared absently at the patterns on the countertop.
Where's Jiro?
Kotaro stopped to blink.
He's still asleep, I think. Maybe you are too.
Mimiko reached for a mug on the countertop and poured the hot water in, dropping a tea bag in with it.
Just another long night.
She dipped the tea bag up and down, one elbow resting on the counter. Silence filled the air as Kotaro watched her bob her tea, practically falling asleep as she stood. He glanced over to the clock and wondered if the compromiser realized the time, not that it really mattered to him. He liked hanging out with Mimiko, but then her boss would probably get mad if she were late. His brother might get mad too, especially if he knew that Kotaro could have done something about it. He deliberated for a moment, one finger on his chin as he thought about it.
Mimi, aren't you supposed to be at work right now?
He looked up at her with large blue eyes, blinking questioningly at her. Mimiko blinked back.
Huh?
You know, you usually gone to work by now. You wouldn't want to be late, right?
Mimiko glanced at the clock, taking a moment to focus on the numbers. She suddenly jumped.
Crap! Is that the time?
She ran to her room, robe trailing behind her as she slammed the door, had to reopen it to pull in the garment, and closed it again. Kotaro stared after her. He didn't know she could move that fast. Less than 5 minutes later, Mimiko was flying past him again and out the door.
Wow, she sure can move when she's in a hurry.
Kotaro watched her run out the apartment, then looked around. The tea she'd been steeping was starting to get cold in its forgotten mug. Jiro woke to an empty apartment. Outside he could hear the sounds of people walking, vehicles moving, the usual banter of the day. Their current schedule was messing with his sleep. He put one hand over his eyes as if he could just ignore everything and go back to sleep. But the events of the night before nagged at the back of his mind. He sat up and looked around. Kotaro was gone. Not hugely surprising, he decided, considering he'd been hyper most of the previous evening because he'd been invited over to Sei's mansion. He smelled the air to get a sense of the hour, sometime in the afternoon, he decided. And with that he got up, walking slowly through the apartment and down the stairs to the main level of the warehouse. The sounds from last night definitely had come from the direction of that sealed door, and so he headed in that direction, deep in thought, trying to place the scent that still lingered in the back of his mind. Definitely not someone he knew. Scents from outside found his nose drifting in on a faint breeze from the direction he was headed, and, after skirting a few more boxes, he found himself looking at the door in question. Upon initial inspection, nothing seemed out of place, at least not to a human's eye. But Jiro noted that there was now a slight gap to one side, where someone had tried to peel the metal away. He stared at the small crack for a while, then absently went out and around, keeping to the shadows as much as possible, silently bewraying himself for not grabbing his umbrella. The faint imprint of fingers met his inspection as he looked at the door from the other side. Any normal vampire could have easily taken the door with a swift pull, probably making more noise than they wanted, though. Whoever had tried to break in was careful. After all, throwing a door would cause a lot of attention. Jiro mused in the shadows, one hand to his chin as he thought. He'd have to do something to reinforce that door while Mimiko was out. If she saw the activity, she'd definitely want to know what was going on. He didn't know what to tell her, and for the sake of protecting her, he wasn't about to tell her until he knew more.
I'll have to get someone to fix this.
He finally decided and headed out to find someone to do just that, stopping to pick up his umbrella on his way out.
Earth to Mimiko! Earth to Mimiko!
The brunette girl tried to wave away whoever was trying to wake her. Why couldn't they just let her sleep?
Hey Mimiko, time to get up! Wake up!
Mimiko raised her head from her desk and blinked.
Hey, Hibari. What are you doing here?
Hibari Kusunogi glared down at her senior compromiser.
I work here, and so do you, unless you don't get up, that is. Jinai's coming.
Jinai?
Mimiko's face was blank as she stared at her junior. Hibari changed her glare to a scowl, hands on her hips.
Oh, come on, you know, our boss. You really need to stop staying up so late with that silver blade.
Something stirred in Mimiko's thoughts at the sound of Hibari's tone. She sat bolt upright, blushing eyes wide at what the girl was implying.
You know it's nothing like that.
Hibari gave her a smug look.
Right, as if anyone could believe that face of yours.
Mimiko turned away, her face still burning.
Stop jumping to conclusions.
Their attention was diverted by the opening of the door.
Good afternoon, ladies.
The head of the Department of Mediation for the Order Coffin Company entered the room, ignoring the awkwardness of the conversation he'd walked into. A chorus of good afternoons from around the room followed his greeting as the various compromisers turned to give him their full attention.
I don't want to take long, so I'll get straight to the point. We've had reports of strange activity in the special zone. Nothing to really worry about, but I thought I'd give you a heads up in case you're called in to mediate. So far, it's just minor things, but one never knows if that'll change. Just keep your eyes open, and let us know if you see anything out of the ordinary. Keep up the good work, ladies. I'll let you know if you're needed.
Murmurs filled the air as Jinai left, the various compromisers talking among themselves about the news.
Did you hear that, Mimiko? What do you think could be happening? What if the vampires are rising up in rebellion? What if we have another Kulon infiltration?
Aren't you forgetting that there's no way another Kulon child could get in? And why would the vampires rise in rebellion when we live in harmony with them?
Hibari stopped briefly in her ramblings, looking at Mimiko like she was missing the point.
But it was so easy the last time. What if it happens again? I don't think I could take it. Oh my gosh, what do we do?
There you go again, overreacting.
But Hibari was already off in her own world of imagining, leaving Mimiko out, which was just fine with her, even though the younger girl's wild imagination was overflowing more than usual. Mimiko looked at the clock. The day was almost over, finally. Having longer and later shifts was definitely messing with her schedule, but they were necessary to get her used to being able to be up and about at night. Unfortunately, it made the days drag on, and time dragged now, especially since she only had another half hour until she could call it a day. Unless an assignment came in, something she hoped didn't happen.
I'm going to get something to eat.
Her stomach reminded her that not only had she not had breakfast, but that she'd somehow managed to skip lunch.
Want something, Hibari? Hibari? Never mind, you're too busy daydreaming.
She hadn't really expected an answer from her chattering companion, but had felt it polite to ask all the same. She blinked a few times on her way to the vending machine, finding it hard to keep her eyes open. Unfortunately, she didn't notice the door ahead of her suddenly swing open in front of her. Her knee banged painfully into the door.
Ouch!
A usually quiet and reserved compromiser named Chihuru peeked around the door, her eyes wide.
Sorry!
But before Mimiko could say anything to her, she had popped back into the room and closed the door, leaving her more than a little upset as she rubbed at her already bruised knee.
Why does life keep conspiring to kill my knees?
She leaned against the wall for a minute, trying to calm herself down while trying to ignore the throbbing pain.
Ugh, this just isn't worth it. I'm going home. Janai can get mad at me later for leaving early.
Abandoning the idea of just getting a quick fight, Mimiko headed towards the main doors, pushing out into the dying sunshine. She tried to block the last rays from blinding her as she walked towards the nearest taxi stand. Jiro would probably be less than happy with her if she tried to walk the distance back to the apartment, especially as tired as she felt and with night coming on. It would leave her defenses far too open for the Black Blood's liking.